Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Geek Warning from the Escape Collective. I'm James Huang, and for the first time in quite a while, I'm sitting here in the Boulder Gruppetto next to our resident pro mechanic, Zach Edwards. Hi, Zach.
Hello.
And joining us remotely from Sydney, Australia is tech editor Dave Rome. Hi, Dave.
Hello.
Ronan is sadly out sick today, and Kaylee is still somewhere in France swimming. I believe he's swimming laps in an Olympic-sized pool full of rosé. So we'll just have to check back with Kaylee when it comes up for air. Anyway.
If there's any truth to that, I want to be there.
Sounds lovely.
Yeah. I'm sure it'll be on an Instagram story somewhere. Zach, it's been a while since we've had you on, but as usual, things look pretty busy here in the shop. I have to say, though, I'm a little surprised to see a certain something on your personal bike hanging up on the wall there. I believe I see a Ceramic Speed OSPW on your bike.
You do.
Which seems very un-Zach-like.
Saving all the lots. Marginal gains on a gravel bike.
It's like your bike is self-propelled now.
Yep. I barely have to pedal.
Dave, I noticed on your Instagram stories that you had a little shipment come through recently.
Yeah. It's a new tool that I paid for a few months ago. I'd pre-ordered some tools from Noble Wheels in the UK, and they have finally been made and shipped, and it's exciting new tools day. So new bearing extractors from Noble Wheels, very very fancy.
To add them to your assortment of like your drawer full of bearing extractors already.
Got to collect them all.
Indeed. Okay. One of these days, Dave, I'm going to make it down there and check out your workshop.
Yeah. It's not large, but it's
very densely packed.
Yeah, densely packed.
Okay, well, we've got a pretty broad mix of things to talk about on today's show. We're going to talk tire sizes at the tour. Factor's got a fancy new climbing bike. SRAM's brought its fancy transmission electronic mountain bike shifting technology down to the GX level. And a startup in Australia has an interesting proposal that promises to bring non-destructive carbon fiber test methods maybe even down to the bike shop level. We'll see. And then as usual, we'll see what's on the minds of our podcast crew this week. And we'll wrap up with some, hopefully a useful public service announcement that will hopefully save some of you some money on expensive drivetrain components. But first, a word from this week's sponsor, which is once again our own Escape Collective members. Geek Warning is brought to you each week ad-free because it's 100% funded by our membership dues. Being an Escape Collective member not only gets you full access to everything on the site, as well as the ability to leave comments, but also an invitation to our members-only Discord channel, live podcast recordings, and not to mention that warm and fuzzy feeling you get when you know that you helped build this publication the way that you want to see it. So if you're already a member, thanks so much for the support. If you like what you're getting in return, please consider telling your friends about us so that maybe they can join too. And if by some small chance you are not happy with what you're getting, tell us why, because we're all ears over here. Full memberships start at just $12 a month US per month, or you can save a bunch by going the annual route. And if you want to just quietly read in your own corner and not really participate, there's also now a $7 per month monthly subscription. Whichever way you decide, head over to escapecollective.com to sign up. And we also want to give a special shout out to some of our lifetime members who each played a big role in getting this whole operation off the ground earlier this year. This time around, I'm going to call out at some industry folks who apparently want to lend a hand to getting Escape Collective off the ground, including David McQuillan, Knife of Sufferlandria, and the founder of the Sufferfest. We want to thank the folks at Routeworks, makers of that super slick handlebar bag with the flip-top lid, built-in computer mount, and nifty attachments for lights and cameras. Kurt Hoy at Bosch e-bike systems. No explanation needed for what they do. Brian Bernard at Cervelo, and Tyler Jordan, one of the co-founders of one of my personal favorite cycling clothing brands, 7Mesh, out of Canada. So thanks to all of you and the rest of the Escape Collective Lifers crew for the assist. And now on with the show. All right, first up in the news segment this week, let's talk about this new Factor O2 VAM. So Factor describes this as, quote, the world's fastest climbing bike, unquote. Although I would say that would depend on the rider, don't you? But as you'd expect, it's very light, supposedly just about 730 grams for a 54 centimeter frame. And Factor says it's 35% stiffer on average than the previous O2 VAM. And as is the trend these days, Factors has also given the O2 VAM a bunch of aero tube shapes. Company says it saves 12 watts of rider effort at 48 kilometers per hour. So it's still kind of an all-rounder, especially since it's also supposedly kind of comfy. Cable routing is fully internal, as you'd expect. Factor's using its own black ink, one-piece integrated carbon bar and stem. There's actually an integrated seat mast on this thing. There's clearance for 32 mil tires, although it's optimized for 28s. You got a T47 asymmetrical threaded bottom bracket. Factor's even offering the thing in 7 sizes, including 4 different fork rigs, which is actually quite impressive. So about the only thing that doesn't sound great about this thing is the price, which starts at a whopping $6,300 for the frame set. Ouch.
Ooh.
What do we think here?
I mean, my initial question that I didn't see in any of the press release was, can you sit on the top tube of this one? Because the previous O2 VAM had a big sticker that said, don't sit on the top tube.
Oh, I actually don't know because, and that would be particularly interesting in this particular case because the top tube on this new O2 VAM is like super, super thin.
I'm guessing
at least
not.
like in terms of height. Well, I mean, I went to, so we're here in Boulder, Colorado, and Factor actually just opened a factory showroom here in town. And I was over there Monday evening checking out that new bike, and I don't recall there being a sticker on the top tube saying "Do not sit here." So hopefully you can sit there. Although even if you did sit there, I can't imagine it'd be all that comfy of a place to sit.
Yeah. I mean, the top tube's not designed to be a lawn chair, but it's still a common place for you to rest a thigh while waiting at a set of lights or something like that. So
Indeed.
The fact that, Factor, they're not the only ones producing a bike that has a top tube that may crack if you sit on it, but they're obviously one of the few to have actually announced it and said, please don't do this because it won't be a warranty. So yeah, it's, I don't know. I think given the frame weight, I'd be surprised if you can now sit on it.
Well, in terms of aero, as I said, like they did infuse a bunch of aero tube shapes into this thing, and Factor is saying that it is only 5 watts slower than the Astro VAM. At that same speed, I presume, 48K an hour. Although I have to say, it was a little conspicuous to me that when Israel Premier Tech rider Mike Woods won on top of Puy de Dôme the other day, he was riding an Astro VAM and not this bike, which is...
That's the thing, though, is like, no matter how light this bike is, for the World Tour guys, like, there's a minimum weight. So like if you have an aero bike at 6.8 kilos and you have a climbing bike at 6.8 kilos, even if the climbing bike is marginally aero, like, why would you not choose the full aero bike over a little bit aero bike?
More speed.
Yeah.
And I did mention that Ronan's not here today. However, he did just recently receive a Factor test bike. Or I should say he did just receive a new O2 VAM test bike from Factor. And he's on a 56, and he said with pedals and the fancy new carbon spoked wheels that Black Ink also introduced with this bike, his bike, I think he said, came out at like 6.3 kilos. So he's well below the UCI limit.
6.7 is what he said, but it was
6.7, was it?
6.7, I believe, but it's with Asioma pedals, which are
quite heavy.
one of the heavier options. Yeah. So and that's with SRAM Red as well, which again, it's a high-end group set, but it's not exactly a super light group set if you're comparing against stuff from a few years back. So, I mean, that's 6.7 kilos with pedals is pretty light.
So still a little room to play with.
Yeah, and that would probably be with sensible tires and all that. So, I mean, it's definitely not a weight weenie build, and it's still coming under the UCI limit. So, yeah, dare I say, it's I can kind of understand why the team might still be on the Ostro. I mean, it's one, they're used to it, but also the Ostro is a very lightweight bike in itself. So it's sort of, there's probably only 150 to maybe 200 grams difference between these two. So
I think it's actually only 100, in fact.
100 grams. Okay, well, there you go.
I think it's only 100 grams for the lightest Ostro VAM.
So it's just so interesting. Like for racing, I don't know why you would not choose the Ostro, right? Like the O2, you're going to have to add weight to it to make it legal. I think like riding a really light bike is super fun, but then that's not necessarily the racing crowd, right? So like it's interesting they're marketing this as like saving X amount of watts at this speed. Like the people that care about the watts aren't the people that are buying the 14-pound bike, right? Like they just want a fun light bike to go do hill climbs and ride in the mountains and stuff.
I guess for the people who really are going after the weight weenie bikes, I mean, ultimately they want weight weenie bikes because they want to feel like they're going uphill faster, right? And I guess if you can provide that low weight and also give them some dose of aero, presumably without taking away from the weight and stiffness and so on, then I mean, that would only be a plus, right? I mean, I totally get what you're saying, Zach, and My guess is Factor maybe is also hearing what people are saying also, because another change on this bike relative to the other, or I guess the previous generation O2 VAM, is Factor has actually increased the stack height on this thing by 10 millimeters pretty much across the board, and that was apparently due to owner requests. I can't imagine the team would have ever asked for 10 mils more stack. So I think that may be sort of a tacit acknowledgement that this bike is kind of more kind of more favored by higher end enthusiasts as opposed to like World Tour racers.
It was hinted to me that I may have been partially responsible for that increase of stack, and I'm very proud of that. So yeah, it's anyway, it's good to see.
Well done, Dave. Well done. What do we think of the integrated seat mast here? Or just the fact that there's an integrated seat mast in general?
I don't mind it. I think like it makes a lot of sense from the point of view of being able to better control the ride quality of a bike. Especially the flex through the seat mast, the fact that you don't have all that overlapping material between a seat post and a seat tube. I actually quite like it, and I know it's something that the industry has done before, and it kind of went away for practicality reasons, and it's slowly coming back. But yeah, I really don't mind it. I'd say the only downside is, and Zach's probably all too aware of this, is when you travel or when you have to pack a bike, you kind of have to get pretty specific with the case you use.
Or take the bike very much apart.
Yeah,
it sits lower in the bag.
Yeah. I mean, with the way bikes, higher end road bikes now are like fully integrated with the cabling and everything, it definitely seems like traveling with any of those bikes is already kind of a pain. So why not make it a little bit more of a pain? Like, what difference does it make?
Yep. So yeah, I think that's the barrier. But as long as you pick a 54 centimeter or below, no matter what size you actually need, then I think it's no problem when you travel.
Excellent. Well, for the taller riders, you can just get this super, super, super tall seat mast topper.
Yeah, or just run it like as if you're Mahoric and the dropper post the whole time.
Yep.
Faster
Totally.
if you ride a smaller bike. Yeah.
One thing I have to say that I'm really happy to see on that bike is that they have, well, as I mentioned, 7 frame sizes, but also that they're using 4 different fork rakes. And I have to imagine that would be influenced by I don't know, he's either lead engineer Graham Shrive over there. Graham came from Cervelo, and Cervelo was a company who kind of was famously known for running a whole bunch of fork rakes on their sizes to get the handling that they wanted. So if this has come about as part of Graham's influence, then good on you, Graham. I'm happy to see that, because obviously making 4 different forks is not, well, it's 4 times as expensive as using the same one across the board.
Yeah, I'd say it's without doubt his influence, and yeah, I mean you'd only do it if you truly believe that it makes a valuable difference. Because as you say, it's the most expensive way to do it, is to keep creating different fork rakes for the same bike. So yeah, he has to strongly believe that it makes a difference in order to justify it. And yeah, it is nice to see. But it does, it's obviously absorbed into the, what was it, $6,300?
$6,300 for the frame set.
Yeah, that's pretty high.
Is that frame only, or is that like frame set module? Like, so cockpit and seat post and all of that.
I think it's normally a module.
I believe it's a module.
So it's not like terrible.
And they give you like a
but if you
bottom bracket
compared to like an S-Works or something, then you're still buying the stem and the handlebar,
right?
And that kind of like.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's outrageously expensive or outrageously more expensive than some other stuff out there, but
no,
it's definitely not necessarily like a value play either.
No.
I mean, it's not trying to be.
I mean, Factor's like effectively a consumer direct company, so for the last few years they've sort of played that space where they go after trying to be the most high end option, but sort of priced underneath like an S-Works traditionally. So it kind of sounds like they're still sticking around that sort of price point, and they give a few like sneaky value adds, like the headset ceramic speed, the bottom bracket ceramic speed, and those are the sort of parts, like at least for the bottom bracket, that's probably a $300+ part that you don't get with other frame set modules. So
sure,
yeah, so it's not bad value when you compare it against other very high end and pricey bikes.
I mean, at least in the US, Factor does have a bunch of dealers, so like they're not really a consumer direct brand, but I think it is also worth noting that they do actually make their own stuff. So I would probably say they're most akin to like Giant, for example, who has a traditional dealer network, but also manufactures their own things. So I would guess, if nothing else, that maybe gives Factor either certainly a little bit more control in how this stuff is manufactured, and maybe a little more leeway in terms of what they get to do. But I would imagine that they get to keep a little bit more of that margin for themselves too, because there's certainly a layer that's
in most
gone there.
markets for sure. Yeah, most markets are consumer direct. I think the US is kind of a unique beast for them.
So either way, it looks like a pretty interesting bike. I'm looking forward to hearing Ronan's thoughts on it once he's back on the mend and feeling a little bit healthier. I dare say he's probably pretty well suited to evaluating how well this bike goes uphill. Probably, well, I shouldn't say probably. Without a doubt, he is the best suited for anyone on staff to determine how well this bike goes uphill.
Do you think he'd be able to realize if it really is the fastest climbing bike?
I'd imagine he'd sure be willing to give it a shot.
Yeah. I'm probably the wrong person to test that, because I wouldn't want to go up the same hill as many times to find out. So
yeah, I mean, I would hop on it and be like, "Yep, I'm still slow. This bike is terrible." But anyway, we will wait to hear more from Ronan, hopefully soon on that. Moving on to the next bit of news, though. Speaking of Ronan, he measured a whole bunch of tire sizes when he was at the tour, and there were a few, I guess, pretty big trends that we noticed over there. So one is that tubulars really are pretty much nearly extinct as far as the pro peloton goes. With he found only Cofidis was still using them across the board, just that one team. And then
they won on them. They won on them.
They did.
Still fast.
I mean, they were never really that slow.
No.
Anyway, and then two other big major trend. Tires have gotten really big in the pro peloton. So he found a few teams running 25 mil printed width tires that pumped up to 27 mil on the kind of the new generation of wider rims. Most of the teams that he found, though, were running 28 mil tires with actual widths closer to 30 or 31. So I know the industry has been pushing for this sort of increased tire size for quite a while for a variety of reasons. And general consumer bikes certainly seem to be going this way, have been for a little bit. But considering how pro riders have historically been pretty averse to big changes, I'd say this still seems like a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, the tires on Pogacar's bike surprised me. 31 millimeter measured. I mean, that's wide. Like that's
big,
and for anyone following the tour, he's doing well. So yeah, I mean, it's that for me is kind of all the evidence you need that the new movement that James you've been reporting on for probably, I'm going to guess 7-8 years now, talking about wider tires and in performance sense. I'd say we're well and truly there now, and it's hard to deny.
And I think too, though, like how he races, right, is like so much more aggressive than not that long ago, like Froome in the Sky era, right? Like they were very robotic, riding on the climbs at such a high pace that basically no one could attack. And he is attacking on the downhills, attacking in the corners, and just really, really racing his bike and having the confidence of a big tire that you can just dive bomb into a corner. It adds up to be a lot, right? Like you don't, on a 25 or 23 mil tire, you're not going to be ripping stuff like he is and how Van der Poel is and all these bike racers now.
Yep.
We hear a lot from skeptical readers and listeners and that sort of thing about how they feel like the bike industry sort of just pushes things on their sponsored riders and teams, just whether or not it's actually better. But I think this is, I really feel like this is a situation where maybe the industry was pushing this trend on the riders, but this seems like the sort of thing where if it actually wasn't better, we would still be seeing riders on 25 mil tubulars.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I simply don't think we'd see the likes of the yellow jersey contenders with some of the biggest teams running these if they genuinely didn't believe it was a performance advantage. Like these teams have very large budgets from their main sponsors that they don't need to take the money from, say, Envy in order to make the team succeed and make the team sustainable. I mean, they have those partnerships with these products because they believe there's a performance advantage. And if there weren't, they'd be on another product. You know, there's dozens of brands that would happily give them the product. It's just yeah. So for me, I think we're there. I think there's enough proof now that 25s are dead, and you know, the new future or the current future and the previous future is wider tires for performance.
I just find it particularly interesting that, you know, whereas a lot of us were thinking that 28 was kind of as far as it would go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you factor in the modern rim widths now, the fact that we're looking at measured tire widths at like 30, 31 at the Tour.
Yeah.
It's still, even just a few years ago, it seemed like that would almost be completely unheard of. Like, it just seems like you never would have seen that.
Right.
Oh yeah, that was a Paris-Roubaix size. Yeah. Yeah, I do think, like, obviously there's going to be times when the narrow tires still are faster, like in certain time trial conditions and all that. But yeah, I think for general road riding, I think we're seeing something. I guess for me, what surprises me is from the tubeless sense of things is just the adoption rate was crazy quick. I mean, it's exactly as quick as you and I had speculated on, and say the likes of Josh Portner had speculated on. I did an article with Josh Portner, I'm going to say 3 or 4 years ago, where he had said 5 years from now, every single team will be on tubeless. And at that point, nobody was on tubeless. Like, I think Quick-Step was maybe experimenting with it, but not really. Like, they were it was kind of almost like a specialized marketing maneuver at that point. And yeah, I mean, look at the adoption rate. Like, we're, one team left that isn't on either a clincher or tubeless, and the tubeless tire technology, like, there seems to be some stuff starting to come out or on its way to the market that could be game changing again. So yeah, I don't know. I'm always fascinated by the uptake of this stuff and the resistance from consumers as well. You know, how many fight it until it's right in their face and then admit defeat.
Well, again, it's just sort of like that level of skepticism, right? Like the idea that, like, the man is kind of pushing this stuff on them when they already know better and whatever. But this certainly seems like one of those situations where, you know, if you can have still like competitive weight and aerodynamics in that sort of wider tire and rim setup, then clearly there aren't really big downsides to it.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a tipping point, right? Like,
Sure,
you're not going to see
definitely.
people out at the Tour de France on a 38 mil slick road tire.
Right.
No way.
Right. But I think it seems like things have stabilized pretty quickly. And certainly in the stuff that I've ridden, you know, on my regular everyday road bike, I am running 28 mil tires that pump up to about 30, 31 or so.
Yeah, ditto.
And I don't feel the need to go any wider for a bike that basically only sees tarmac. And past that, I just don't really feel like I'm getting anything out of it.
Yeah.
It's obviously a different story for my bike that I use on like dirt roads and stuff like that, but they're not doing that. So this seems to be a kind of, I mean, I don't know. I feel like this is going to stay like this for a while now.
See, that's what I think will be interesting. Like, it'll be interesting to see what's next. I don't think everyone's going to be like, well, we've all decided 28 mil tubeless is the best option. Like, it's still a competitive sport. Everyone's going to be looking to, like, what's the next, latest, greatest, most competitive advantage. And I think that'll be the interesting thing. Like, obviously, like, there'll be tire technologies and stuff, but just, I think it'll be interesting to see what, I don't know, 5 or 10 years from now, what the World Tour is riding.
Yeah, I think for me, the next frontier is kind of a return to aerodynamic focus, right? Like, we've sort of seen a lot of brands sort of take priority away from that and focus on things like rolling resistance and weight optimization and tire support. And I think now that James, like, as you say, James was kind of settling on this new agreed upon width, in a sense, like, they've found this nice balance point. And I think there'll probably be renewed focus on really trying to aerodynamically optimize for that width, because there are a few brands that do it, but there are a lot that are quite dated in that sense.
Well, we're kind of already seeing that a little bit on the tire front too, because there are, and it's just a couple of brands right now, but there are definitely a couple of brands that offer what they describe as like aero profile tires. And the way that the casings are designed, these tires are still basically like a normal width, but they're like a little pointier, so to speak. So, and you know, these companies are saying that these tires are a little bit more aerodynamic than just a regular round profile. And that probably is the place where we see another step change. Like I said, I don't really see that road tires are going to get much wider than they are now. Like, it does seem like we've kind of reached a happy medium, but I certainly can see that tire companies are going to continue to optimize that shape to try and cut through the wind a little bit better.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally don't love how a lot of those tires handle, because to me, they feel kind of tippy.
I would think more like the tire to rim junction is going to be more important than trying to make a pointy tire.
Yeah, well, we see that already too. I mean, I talked to the folks at Goodyear at Eurobike, and one of the things that they pointed out was that they apparently don't make a huge deal out of this, but especially with a lot of modern road rims going with a hookless format, Goodyear, they said that their bead is shaped such that it has a particularly smooth transition between the rim and the tire, and that's something Ronan went over to check, and he seemed to agree. And I feel like that is something that we're going to start seeing too. So it seems like the size is, people are pretty happy with it, but yeah, I mean, I would agree that we're going to start seeing some more little aero optimizations here and there, and it seems like the natural direction.
Yeah, everything repeats in the bike industry. So I mean, it's just, it's forever progressing, but it sort of does it in categorical waves, I guess. Like the whole industry will focus on rolling resistance for 3 years and get that to a point, and then one brand, an influential brand, will find aerodynamics, and then that's the next hot thing that everyone wants, and no one wants to be behind on. So I think we're about to see a return back to aero. Anyway,
I'm still waiting for Purple Anno and CNC machining to make their way to the road bikes.
You can have that. You just have to have round tubes and 9+ kilos.
Yeah.
All right. Well, moving on from road bikes, let's head over to some mountain bike news here, because SRAM has just announced a new GX level version of its mountain bike transmission stuff. Dave, what's the story here?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone's seen the previous transmission stuff that came out in March of this year, at like the XX and XO levels, same, just cheaper. is probably the easiest way to put it. I mean, it's 1x12 speed group set. It's kind of locked. It's kind of a proprietary system. It's using SRAM's UDH, the Universal Derailleur Hanger mount on the frame. So you do need a bike that has a UDH mount or derailleur hanger. And yeah, it's got all the same technology as the higher end stuff. It's just as SRAM does, they trickle that technology down with sort of lower cost and heavier materials, sometimes cheaper manufacturing methods, and that's what GX achieves. It saves approximately $500 versus the model above it, the XO, and doesn't add a huge amount of weight. A lot of the weight's actually in the cassette and crank. The derailleur itself is like there's less than 10 grams difference. From a feature point of view, there isn't much difference, but the GX does actually have a different construction now. So it's the battery's more tucked away. It's kind of tucked into the derailleur, and that derailleur construction method is different to what it was before. Previously, it was kind of the T-mount that sort of sandwiches the UDH dropout. That was sort of one machined in one piece, and the GX moves more to like a two-piece bolted up design, which surely is cheaper to produce.
Yeah, and the fact that the rear derailleur has such a minimal weight penalty, it's like 10 grams or something like that, isn't it? Like it's pretty surprisingly minimal,
and that's with a heavier steel cage, and you can just put a carbon lower cage assembly onto that and probably get it even lighter than an XO derailleur.
But if anything, I would almost think from a consumer standpoint, I'd almost want the GX rear derailleur for that more durable cage if you hit it on something. But two, the way that battery is now tucked in more into that T-type mount.
And you can replace the battery
latch. Yeah. So like those are all really, really good things. I mean, maybe they'll roll those changes into the XO and XX level at some point. It seems like that would be a good place to do, a good thing to do. I mean, they'd have to redesign the rear derailleurs to some extent, but anyway, unless you are like hyper weight weenie and trying to save every last little gram, the GX rear derailleur, at least anyway, seem like that would be my pick actually.
Yeah.
But like you said, the crank and the cassette are definitely heavier. I mean, the cassette's like 100 grams or so heavier than the XX SL cassette, something like that. And then
yeah, probably. Yep.
and the crank is kind of heavy. It's like it's similar to the XO, except that window that's in the XO crank is now filled in. The crank set's like 700 something grams, so it's not particularly
and I
light.
think it's running a steel chainring as well, isn't it? So there's an easy win.
Yeah,
if that's
it's
true.
definitely stamped, not machined. The chainring.
Either way,
Yeah,
the crank
okay.
set's not particularly light, so like that's certainly someplace where you could save some weight.
Yeah. It just feels like a massive OE play. Like no bike company is going to stock Shimano anymore. They're like 3 generations of SRAM mountain bike drivetrains. Like they're just lingering back there still. Not to say it's not good stuff, but it's just like SRAMs can't. It's just so far ahead than what they're doing.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and from an OE play, like talking present day, like you really have to have a mountain bike that you've bought within the last 2 to 3 years in order to actually run this stuff, because that's how long the UDH system's been around for. So yeah, it's not like there's a huge aftermarket that are keen to upgrade their drivetrains, because there's a lot of mountain bikes out in the market that simply cannot be used with this system.
Right. But man, I mean, I would bet we're going to see an awful lot of complete bikes spec'd with GX transmission.
All of them.
Oh yes.
Like there's who would stock Shimano now?
And the sad thing is, I mean, the Shimano mechanical stuff, it
works really, really
great.
well.
Like it works really well, but the perception is that is kind of old and outdated. And from a consumer standpoint, if you're looking at the shiny new thing versus the, reliable and dependable older thing, I mean, you're going to kind of be attracted to the shiny new thing, I think. That's just sort of the nature of it, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, also, too, like, even no matter how good the Shimano is, that if you're buying a bike now with that, that within probably, I mean, I could have said this like 2 years ago at this point, but like, you would like to think like within the next year, Shimano is going to come out with a new group set. And then your group set is now this old one that is outdated, right? So, like, why would you buy and invest in a product that they're working on a replacement for already?
Right.
Question. I've been looking at e-mountain bikes, and would you rather get GX transmission or Shimano's new like XT Link Glide, which is mechanical 11 speed, but designed for like kind of e-bike abuse, durable cassette.
Good question.
I mean, this is an interesting thing, because like e-bike, like SRAM had an e-bike drivetrain a few years ago that was, was it 8 speed or something?
Yeah.
Because like it has a motor. Why do you need all these gears? Like, just let it zoom you up the hill. Why do I need to shift and have the perfect cadence? Like, it has a motor.
Yeah,
that's a good question, Dave. I don't think I have an answer for that one. Well, and just like with the SRAM stuff, that link, Shimano was calling that link glide still, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, that Shimano e-bike specific group set. That one was also designed with a new shifter that did not allow for, I think it only allowed one shift in either direction at a time, didn't it?
I believe so. I haven't ridden it yet, but yeah.
But that was for the same reason why the transmission multiple shifts are definitely slower, is because when you're dealing with that extra torque, you want to be able to make sure that the chain's fully engaged before moving on to the next sprocket. So yeah, I honestly don't know which one of those two I'd prefer. I mean, I haven't tried it, but I think it would almost be a matter of personal preference.
Yeah, and it's a hard choice, because like on e-bikes now, SRAM's equipping its transmission in some cases with like a wired battery, which is really cool. So you don't have a battery that you need to charge. It's this little charger that clips into the derailleur that has a wire that runs into your central battery. So it's kind of a fully integrated system now, which is neat.
Very slick, for sure. To be clear, this new GX transmission stuff still is not inexpensive. I think it's like $1,100 US, something like that, for what is it? Shifter, crank, cassette, rear derailleur chain.
Yep.
So that doesn't include brakes and all that other stuff. So yeah, anything but inexpensive. But as you said, Dave, it does, certainly having used all 3 versions of transmission at this point now, it does seem to shift exactly the same. And yeah, for my money, that's what I would go with personally.
Yep. I would. The other thing that GX showed me, which I'm kind of somewhat fond of, or at least intrigued by, is the fact that they changed the construction method of that rear derailleur. Kind of bodes well for them being able to trickle the tech down maybe another step further.
I mean, SRAM is awfully good at trickling down their tech from the top down, especially with the electronic stuff.
Yeah.
So like we just saw now like a fourth tier for their electronic road components. Now we've got Red, Force, Rival, and now Apex. So now for transmission, we've got XX, XO, GX, and then NX, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's hope they don't do an SX, but NX will accept.
Just don't use the wood screws in the trailer for the limit screws.
Yeah, SX, I would say, is universally not our favorite over here. They tried.
Yeah.
I don't think it's anyone's favorite.
No.
Yeah, they tried. It's okay. You can't win them all.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I like as I mentioned, I've got that stuff right now, and Dave, you posted kind of like a little overview article just yesterday, I think, was it?
Yeah.
And yeah, so head over to escapecollective.com and check that out. And yeah, I'll have a full review of the group set pretty soon. Just as, once I've had, I feel like a little bit more testing on it. So I feel like I'm getting pretty close. But speaking of testing, I want to talk about carbon fiber testing because this is a big topic on today's show. So we do talk a lot about carbon fiber and specifically the care and feeding of carbon fiber stuff. And Dave, you recently stumbled upon some interesting news regarding carbon fiber inspection methods. So what did you find?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I stumbled upon it. They found me, but
yeah, you stumbled upon it sort of in the sense that someone stuck a stick in your legs and you tripped on it.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, an Aussie company I'd been in touch with previously. I mean, they've sort of slowly been doing soft launches over the past year or so. It's called Cycle Inspect, and their mission as a company is to basically systemize an affordable and approachable non-destructive testing system for the bike industry. So yeah, they're basically offering they're using ultrasound technology, but they basically have a software package that aims to make the data more easy to digest, and they have training that comes along with that system. Takes apparently they've currently just got like a slightly more entry level training at the moment. But yeah, to be certified in it takes about 8 to 10 hours of lessons. And there is some experts that they have one-on-one with. But yeah, it's kind of just an interesting system because currently, if you want a bike to be ultrasounded, there's only a small handful of carbon fiber experts that you can send it to. And it often means being without a bike for a few weeks. It means typically disassembling it into a frame and then shipping that off and having it check. So like Ruckus Composites in the US does that. Raoul Lucia in Australia is probably the pioneer of it. But yeah, it's not accessible, and a lot of people tend to look at the cost of doing it and the expense of not having their bike and sort of end up just chancing it, right? Like they just go, oh, well, it doesn't look broken, or I'm just gonna, what's the worst that can happen? And they'll just run it, and that's an incredibly dangerous thing. So yeah, so Cycle Inspect, they've actually partnered with the University of New South Wales, and they're doing they're trying to do a study that looks into, they're trying to find out how many potentially dangerous carbon bikes are out on the roads today. It remains very interesting to me to see how they'd actually go about doing that. It's obviously they've only just launched the study, but yeah, I think along with Cycle Inspect, as they roll out their technology and as they collect the data from anyone that they train, I think they will probably end up having a relatively large pool of data to base this all on.
So do we have any sense as to how widespread they either anticipate or want to have this technology spread out to?
Yeah, I mean, they want it in bike shops. They want it in large bike shops or even small, like one-man band, like Zach style shops. They want that mechanic to be able to confidently scan a bike, look at, say, something that's external damage or something that they don't feel all that safe about. Maybe there's been a crash and they want to inspect the fork, and actually come away with being able to make a decision as to whether continue to ride or to, basically involve someone else, like a carbon repairer, and say like, I'm not sure, like I've found something, I'm not sure, but and recommend to the customer that they send the bike off. And yeah, it's basically just another level of say like the tap test that's currently done. It's basically just adding more evidence to that. It's a more professional look at that. It's just a more detailed analysis than what the tap test possibly could do. So yeah, they definitely want to roll this out. And at the same time, I think they're trying to work with like insurance companies to start recognizing the dealers that they train, that they can then do insurance claims in shops. Because I don't know what the case is in the US, but in Australia, there's some insurance companies that if you crash a carbon fiber bike, they will only pay you out for that bike after you take the chance of stripping it down and sending it off to someone like Raul Lucia, who will ultrasound the frame. If it's cracked, the insurance company pays out. If it's not cracked, you pay the fee for having it scanned.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of like this risky thing for the customer to do. And so I think Cycle Inspect is potentially coming into this from like a point of view of being like, well, if we can do it in the dealer, then that removes a lot of the risk to the customer. Streamlines it.
In concept, this seems like a good thing, right?
In theory.
Yes. Yeah. In concept, I guess my fear is that Raul Lucia has a lifetime of experience, the likes of Raul Lucia and Ruckus Composites again, like Sean Small there is, he's a mechanical engineer again. He's dedicated his life to knowing what to look for and really being able to analyze these things. And my worry is that someone that's had 8 to 10 hours of training might get a false level of confidence in saying what is and what isn't safe. I think Cycle Inspect have some pretty clear guidelines on not saying things or not approving frames that they're not confident in. And they obviously have experts on tap that you're meant to consult when you're not sure. But yeah, that's just my worry, is that egos are a thing in with anyone, but they do definitely exist in the bike industry amongst mechanics. And that's sort of my worry, is that you might get a mechanic who thinks of themselves as a carbon expert after a week of training.
And I think too, like, it has to be super idiot proof. Like, particularly if they're trying to get in bigger, high volume shops, like peak season, they want to get bikes in and out as quickly as possible. They're not taking the time to like ultrasound a bike, right? And then there's the whole aspect of, is this something bike shops want? Like, do they want to be liable for saying, hey, we scanned this bike, it's not broken, and then it goes out the door and then it cracks and fails, right? Like, is that something that the average bike shop wants to even be responsible for? Or is it easier just to be like, we don't touch it, send it off to this carbon repair place and let them determine?
Yep. Yeah.
But another question too is, even if Cycle Inspect is successful in rolling this out to whatever degree, a lot of times, Raul in particular, if you follow him on Instagram, he is looking for damage for customers who have asked him to look for stuff after a crash, that sort of thing. But he also finds a lot of manufacturer defects straight from the factory. So it would be really interesting to see what that sort of return rate or like defect rate is when more people are looking for this sort of thing. Like, what if you have a bike that has never been crashed at all or has never been in any sort of, like, what if you have a brand new bike straight off the floor that someone who Cycle Inspect has trained determines that there's a defect in something? What do you do then?
Yeah, and that's definitely a big question. And Michael Briggs, who works with Cycle Inspect, he's actually the founder of it. He brought that up himself. He's like, we don't have the layup schedules from these manufacturers, and that's something that I think as a company that they're hoping to get more involved with, where they actually get a better understanding of what is a defect and what isn't a defect. But yeah, I think it's certainly something that this technology is going to open up and probably create more awareness around as more bikes get scanned. And I think hopefully my optimistic view is that manufacturers will start putting more effort into their quality control, knowing that there's an increasing number of the bike amount. Sorry, there's an increasing amount of the bike industry capable of looking inside these frames without just destructing them.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say too. Just it would only be good for the end consumers to have more eyeballs on these things, even if some of those eyeballs might be making incorrect conclusions potentially. But just the fact that more people are watching is generally a good thing.
Yeah. And speaking of like people watching, I guess now's as good of a time as any to mention Ruckus composites that I'd mentioned before. In America, they're based in Oregon, but they themselves have heavily invested in new testing technology, which is pretty exciting to see. They've got both destructive and non-destructive new machines, and they're very much on a path to figure out common questions over failure modes, but also to work with industry partners and players to figure out more safe use of composites. So I'd say Cycle Inspector's doing some really cool stuff from a more attainable and widespread point of view. But you've got the likes of Ruckus and RAL sort of still pushing the industry from a real true professional level as well.
Dave, do you have any idea how much Cycle Inspect might charge a shop or whoever to go through this whole training process and what that equipment might cost?
I don't have pricing, unfortunately. They do have price tiers. So there's like, they offer just the training. So where I believe it basically leaves a shop with a level of knowledge over visual testing. And then they also have like outright, buy the package outright or basically pay month to month. I don't have pricing, but I mean they've got their website advertises the profit that as a shop you can make by having their system. I'd imagine it's not cheap. But that's one to find out still.
Well, I guess where I'm going with this is I wonder what it would take for us to get you trained up with this stuff.
Interesting. I might have to look into that. Okay.
Please do. I think this would be worth you looking into for sure. Let's see where we can go with this. I certainly would not be opposed to carbon fiber bikes passing through Dave Rome's hands, getting a little bit of an extra special look.
I already don't write a lot by overthinking everything. This is not going to help with that.
Oh, that's a good point. Well, all right. Well, why don't you just go ahead and look into it and we'll decide then.
Yeah, cool.
Okay. All right. Well, that's about all we have for the news on this show today. So,
can I add one more point? Because I was chatting with both Sean Small from Ruckus and Michael Briggs for this segment, and Sean mentioned something. I asked him like some early findings that he had come across with his new destructive test machine, which is basically a very it's something capable of creating 11,000 pounds of force.
It's a big hammer.
Yeah. And what they found is that just that carbon fiber is stronger than they realize, basically. But even though they're carbon fiber experts, a tube with a 1.1 millimeter wall thickness maxes out their machine that's capable of creating 11,000 pounds of force.
I mean, a 1.1 mil wall thickness for carbon fiber is pretty thick.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, they have to send it off to a third party with a bigger machine to break that tube. But what's interesting is that once they create a riv nut sized hole in the tube, the force is decreased by almost 50%.
Oh, that's not entirely surprising.
The lesson of that is don't go drilling random holes in your carbon frame to make room for cables and Di2 wires and all that.
That's why Craig Calfee for ages and ages wasn't putting in traditional water bottle bolts in his frames, right? He was gluing on like little threaded stubs.
Yep. Yeah. So if you are going to drill holes in your steerer, send it to a professional, have it reinforced. Don't do it yourself.
Oh God. Yes. Please don't drill holes in your steer tube, please. All right. Anyway. Yeah, Dave, look into that, please. And I'd be curious to hear what you hear back. But I'm also wondering, any of you guys have anything on your minds this week?
Probably.
I'm going to go ahead and ditch the whole like on your mind and over the head of your family thing, because realistically, pretty much this entire show is generally going to be over the heads of our families. So we're just going to take that as a given.
I like it still. I like it.
Zach, what you got?
I mean, I've been thinking about crank width. I feel like you guys touched on it maybe an episode or two ago, but I feel like whether on gravel bikes and mountain bikes, like crank spindles and arm, like the width of where the pedals sit,
everything's getting wider.
Just keeps getting wider and wider and wider. And like, your hips and knees and everything have stayed the same. So I feel like we're sacrificing like good pedaling dynamics for an easy way to like fit more tire and gearing on your bike.
Well, what I found kind of odd, so I mentioned SRAM transmission earlier. One of the sort of side effects, I guess, of them moving to a wider chain line on the transmission stuff is that the Q factors have gotten wider. What I am curious about, however, is for the bikes that I've ridden so far with transmission, the Q factors are wider. However, it also just seems to be just that there's just more space between the chainstay and the crank arm. And it seems like they could have kept it narrower. So what I'm wondering is...
And it's just more flexibility for bike manufacturers.
Yeah,
right?
It gives you like a wider design window, essentially.
Yeah.
But I'm curious how many companies are actually using the full extent of that window. Because I think pushing the chain line out makes a lot of sense. Because there does seem to be room for that. But it almost seems like the crank arms themselves don't need to be spaced out as wide as they are.
I mean, like the problem too is like even on... whether on a mountain bike or gravel bike or whatever, like even if you use short spindles or you move the cleats so that your shoes sit more inboard, like the rear ends have also gotten wider. So then you have to deal with issues of heel rub. And like I recently sold a Cannondale gravel bike that I really liked, but it had a proprietary bottom bracket with an extra long spindle. And like that was too much to annoy. Like I think some people it doesn't really bother, but like if you're particular about fit and positioning, like I sold that bike because the cranks were too wide.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, from the bike fitters I've spoken to, the general trend is that wider is better for a lot of people. Like a lot of bike fitters put their customers onto like the Shimano wider spindle pedals, for example, which adds 4 mil. So I think there is a trend to accepting a wider Q factor than what I guess history tells us. But I would also say that like SRAM transmission is probably pushing it almost too far from a bike fitter point of view. We're talking about 4 mil each side, whereas compared to a road bike, I mean, transmission is what, like 10 mil wider each side. So yeah, I'm with you. I think, we're not making use of the real estate that crank provides. I think some brands probably will, but yeah.
I think too, like, it's almost like SRAM and Shimano are making it easier for the bike brands to be like, here's an easy way to tuck the tire in with short chainstays and a pivot and all of it. Like rather than the bike company having to do problem solving of like, this is the crank that we have to work with. How can we maximize all of the things that we want to tick, right? Like short chainstays with big tire clearance. Like we've figured out how to do that on other bikes. And now all of a sudden like, oh, we have to make the cranks wider so that we can fit these same tires, right? Like, I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me.
I also think we're probably in a weird time at the moment where bike brands are still having to design for SRAM and Shimano, at least in the mountain bike space.
Yep.
And the Shimano cranks don't allow as much room. At least I'm not aware that they do. So you kind of like bike brands are still kind of constrained by what Shimano's doing, even though SRAM has opened up the window so wide.
Well, and I find it particularly funny the timing of all this too, considering that a lot of mountain bike brands now, if anything, they're actually going longer with their chainstays. At least on bigger sizes anyway. Because for ages and ages and ages, it seems like everyone was trying to tuck in the rear wheel as close as you could possibly get it, with the idea that
it's good for wheelies.
Yeah, with the idea that like, oh, it makes for better climbing. When the reality is, it's not necessarily that good for everyone, and certainly for like super steep stuff, as Zach just so succinctly mentioned, it kind of is just a good way to loop out. So it's funny that we're putting all this effort into making all this room on mountain bikes for bigger tires and chain rings and that sort of thing, when we're kind of seeing a lot of frame design go in the opposite
and like
direction.
Tires haven't gotten massively bigger. Like on the mountain bike side, everyone's running like a 2.3 to a 2.5.
Well, and like we tried much bigger tires already, right?
Like we've kind of settled on
thing.
This is the size, but yet like drivetrains and everything keep getting pushed out and pushed out and pushed out.
Yep.
And I point it back to e-bikes.
Yeah,
right?
But that doesn't explain the gravel side of things.
Mid-drive
like
motors.
Why is gravel? Why are we pushing cranks out for gravel then?
Well, but I think gravel still is kind of the Wild West to a large extent. Whereas I think we have already experimented with much bigger tire sizes on mountain bikes. And Dave, as you said, we are still using, I would say even e-bikes still aren't really going any bigger than like 2.6. But on gravel, that I feel like a lot of companies are still kind of trying to figure out what the sort of like, quote unquote normal geometry is, or what the like most standard tire would be. It does seem like people are pretty happy with 40s, maybe 45s, and 50 seems like a bridge too far.
To like use my bikes, for example. So I had this Cannondale, right? And that had these proprietary extra wide spindle and all of this. And basically, I think you could fit a 42 or 45 as the max, right? And you couldn't put a road crank on it. You couldn't even put a normal like gravel crank on it because it was just too wide. And now I have a Crux, which you can fit a normal road crank in, has more or less similar geometry, and has the same tire clearance with a road crank. So to me, it's like, why, if we can do it with a road crank, why do we need to have a proprietary extra wide spindle and crank and all of these things just to essentially have the same result when it's possible with a normal setup?
Well, in gravel, I mean, you can do it with a road crank to an extent, but there are still people that want to go wider on their tires than
but that's like the minority, right? Like, most people are plenty fine with, let's say, the Crux with the tire clearance that has.
Yeah, sure.
You can fit 42s or 45s on, and like that's plenty of tire for 98% of the gravel market.
Yeah.
But yet we have a drivetrain built for that 2% that's on all of the bikes now.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of like what Dave was saying, that bike brands are in kind of a weird space right now because they do, to a large extent, have to design around some of those extremes. Partially maybe just to say that they can. It's sort of just like the usual one-upmanship. And if you have a gravel bike where it's advertised like, oh, we can clear a 50, then for a lot of people will consider that just to be better,
right? And then run a 38.
Yeah.
But yeah, my e-bike point wasn't necessarily regarding tire width; it was regarding motor placement.
Right.
Like the width of the motor is kind of forced wider Q factors, and I think SRAM are kind of like, well, why don't we just make all of our cranks closer to that width? But yeah, all of this is just reminding me that I've had on back order for a few months with Shimano some XTR narrow spindle pedals to try overcome the extra width on some of these bikes. And obviously Shimano's not making enough of them, the fact that I've had them on back order for so long. So I guess my related request to all of this is we're not going to see Q factors all of a sudden get narrower. So can more pedal brands make narrow spindles?
But then you still, I guess if you have larger feet, you still end up with heel rub.
Right.
Yeah, it's fine, but I'm just wanting something for myself. So.
Yeah.
Again, everyone should ride a 54 centimeter integrated aero road bike so they can fit it in their travel case. And everyone should squeeze into a 43 shoe in a regular fit so they can ride narrow spindle pedals.
Done.
Yeah.
So easy. Well, Dave, I'm glad you've kind of figured out the whole bike industry for us.
Yeah, no worries.
I do have a set of those pedals, by the way, though, and you're going to have to pry them out of my cold, dead hands.
Damn it. But yeah, I'd love for Shimano to make an XT version as well. But yeah.
Can you buy the spindle, like the internals separate, and put them in a different?
I can't find where I can get the spindles from.
Because you can buy normal spindles like as a spare part, but I've never looked to see if you get the short ones as a spare part.
Or surely there's a sketchy aftermarket titanium company
I've looked.
Shorter length.
Yeah, I've looked. Danger Home recently posted one which hasn't become available yet, which looked, I think it was Medi. Yeah, I think that looked intriguing to me. But yeah, so far a lot of the dodgy titanium ones are regular width. And I've grooved out enough titanium spindles in my time that I'd rather not spend my own money doing that.
Say what could go wrong, Dave?
Yeah. So anyway, should we do a PSA?
Actually, no, hold on. I got something on my mind too.
Oh, okay. All right. I was skipping mine, but anyway.
Mine's not going to be very long, though, I think. So I have been thinking a lot, and I actually have been thinking about this for a long time. Just I'm annoyed by a lot of water bottle tops because of how much fluid is left in the bottle after you can't squirt any out.
You've ranted about this before.
I may have, but if I have, it hasn't been for a while. And seeing as how it's hot in summer here, I'm ready to rant about it again.
Yeah.
It's a very good first world problem.
It is a very good first world problem. So like,
can't get that last little bit of water out
well, you
without
figure
taking the
if you,
cap off.
if the thing is, if the bottle is advertised as like a 500 ml bottle, but like there's 20 mLs left in it, or even 10, 15, like that's kind of annoying because like you can shake the bottle, you know that fluid's in there.
You just take the top off and
I
then
know,
you drink
but
it.
like, but you want to be able to just like squirt it out. So I have found some bottles that are definitely better than others. So, like my favorite plastic bottles, at least anywhere, are those Elite Flies, like the super light ones, just mainly because the top design is such that you can basically
But the
get
rest of the
every
bottle is so bad. Like all of those Euro bottles, you can't actually like those.
I do actually.
They're so bad. They're so flimsy and just horrendous.
I don't use metal cages, so the cages that I use those bottles in, they hold just fine. They're so nice and squeezy. Like the water squirts out really quickly.
Like we have a bunch of those, and they're just the worst to use.
The tops I can pull off completely and put everything in the dishwasher. Everything gets nice and clean and dry.
Ugh. I mean, the Elite ones are better than the Tax ones because those are just like a fully plastic nozzle, and those are just awful. But
yes, I will agree with that one.
The Euro bottle though is just bad.
We're gonna have to agree to disagree on this one. Dave, you got a PSA?
Yeah, I do. I will skip my mind. I'll save that for next week because it's not urgent. PSA is seeing on our member-only Discord channel on the Escape Collective Discord is forever a lot of chat about chainware, and it's a topic that I've covered in detail twice now. And
third time's the charm, Dave.
It seems like I might have to do a third because the second time I covered it, I thought I was done with that topic, but that article is now no longer available. So, anyway, chainware. It seems like a lot of people are still potentially using the wrong tool to measure their chain width. And by that, what I mean is up until about probably 5-6 years ago, chainware tools had, most of them had two markings, which were 0.75% wear and 1% wear. And the 0.75% wear was kind of intended for like 10 and 11 speed drivetrains, or more 9 and 10 speed drivetrains. And the 1% wear was really intended for like older track chains and like 7 and 8 speed chains. And why this matters is that the teeth of the cogs have gotten narrower and they're more susceptible to wear than they ever were. And I truly believe that 0.75% wear is kind of like your worst case scenario. It's the really, like, I believe you're leaving it too late. If you have a chain checker that measures 0.75% wear on a 11 speed, 12 speed, 13 speed drivetrain, and it drops in at that point, you've already left it too late. You've probably worn out your cassette by that point. And so my preference is always to find a chain checker that measures 0.5% wear and replace your chain at that point, because at that point you haven't quite worn the chain long enough that it's no longer sitting. It's still sitting in the base of the tooth, basically, and it's not wearing the edges of your cassette and chain ring. A bit more, replacing your chain a bit more frequently is my advice. And my worry is that a lot of people have chain tools that are making you leave it for too long. The other point to that is the latest SRAM chains, the flat top chains, they do actually require different tools again because the rollers are different size. So again, a lot of the chain tools that people already own will give you a false reading on those new chains. So that you need to get a chain tool that measures backside to backside. Opposite sides of the rollers. So there's Park Tool do one, Pedro's do one, Union now does one. Zach.
SRAM also does one, and I have
SRAM also does one. It's terrible.
I have the Pedro's one, the Park one, the SRAM one, I think another one.
Yeah.
And I have yet to find one that measures a flat top chain at the point where it should be replaced without having worn the small ring or the aluminum cog on the cassette.
Very interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And maybe that's just a location problem because people climb around here.
Yeah.
But almost every time the chain, it doesn't drop in all the way. It's not where you would be like, okay, this is worn. But you put a new chain on and the small chain ring is worn out and it grinds and it skips in the largest cog in the back.
Have you tried one where, say, with the Pedros, it only dropped into the 0.5% wear and not the 0.75% wear, and you changed the chain then and it was still a problem?
I don't remember. I've not used the Pedro's one in a bit. I don't remember the markings on that side. But I know, like, usually I just replace it like at a certain point where it drops in, like
Yeah.
kind of a, like it's not where it says it should be replaced yet, but like it falls in
it's a little
sooner.
bit. Yeah, the SRAM officially recommend replacing their chains at 0.75%, and that's what their chain tool is based on. It's too late. It's a very clever way of selling more group sets, like more drivetrain components. I don't think that's their intention. I think they genuinely believe that it's fine to replace a chain at that point. But in my experience and like the experience of zero friction cycling and what you're saying, Zach, it is too late. You can wear out. Because
then it's unfortunate because you're like, okay, this bike is scheduled in. We're going to put a new chain on it. And then you put the new chain and you're like, actually, your small chainring is worn out. So now you need a whole new front chainring combo thing, power meter, all of it. And then it's like a whole nother couple days because you have to send it in to get the discounted one and all of, like, it's just annoying.
Yeah, because it seems like at least for mountain bike drivetrains, we're at the point now where the chains have gotten so durable that it is no longer that's no longer the drivetrain component that's wearing out the quickest.
Right.
And unfortunately, it is the one that, well, I guess the chain rings, are usually a little bit cheaper, but it used to be that the chain wore out the fastest, and that was the least expensive to replace. But now, what's wearing out the quickest is the cassette, and that is far and away the most expensive part.
Which still blows my mind that like that's what's happening, and we're still using aluminum for cogs on the cassette, like because that wears down faster. And I don't know. I understand it's the largest cog, and it should wear down like much slower than the rest of it, the smaller cogs, but that's not in reality when you're climbing and you're grinding up some hill. Like when SRAM first came out with these cassettes that have the machined aluminum or machined steel and then an aluminum largest cog, and they're like, we're going to make it so you can replace just the largest one. Like, if that was actually reality, that would be really cool.
Right, because that never actually really happened, did it?
Never happened, no.
Which is unfortunate because if that had actually happened, then that would be really viable.
And that's something like Shimano and Campagnolo historically have offered. You could buy pieces of cassettes,
right?
For Super Record and Duros, you can buy like just the top half of a cassette. But these latest like transmission cassettes, for example, they don't allow for that because they're made as one piece. Yeah. Or they're at least assembled as one piece.
I mean, it used to be for a while, at least with original, like with original XX1 stuff. You did have some aftermarket companies that were offering replaceable or replacement largest cogs. I guess in those cases, it was mostly just so you can get a little bit more range, but that was still a nice, convenient way to kind of get a little bit more life out of a cassette, which otherwise was probably running just fine, except for that aluminum sprocket.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of road cassettes that I've had to get rid of for people because one largest cog was worn out and the rest of the cassette was fine. It's just like mind blowing.
Yeah.
And it's just
a bit there's a lot of waste there.
So like I normally recommend people, if you're training and it's just like, these are your training wheels or whatever, you're not racing, don't care about saving 50 grams, get the rival cassette because it's all steel.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, again, like we spoke about GX earlier, and that's positive because there's now a cheaper cassette in the range that you can use with a small weight penalty, but no other real disadvantage. But yeah, chain wear, don't leave it as long as chain manufacturers claim you to leave it, and use a good chain lube that doesn't collect grit and grind your cassette down into an expensive paste.
A buddy of mine on our Tuesday night ride, he cracked out a bottle of Triflow last night to lube his chain.
Nice.
And, I just cringed. It just hurt me.
His chain was quiet though.
Briefly.
Yep.
It hurt me. It just hurt.
That's a good one.
Mm-hmm. Anyway. Yeah. All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up this show. Dave, I know you've got a train to catch because you've got a training seminar that you need to go to. So just a quick reminder, if you have not already become a member of the Escape Collective, please head over to escapecollective.com and consider signing up. We've got a whole bunch of different tiers that you can look at. If you are already a member, thanks again. And again, please tell your buddies about Escape Collective. Another thing for this podcast in particular, you may have noticed that there are no ads whatsoever. We've never had them on Geek Warning. So if you like what you're listening to, and if you're not paying for it, please consider paying for it. Please, pretty please. And at the very least, if you are not yet willing to become a member, at least head over to iTunes and give us a rating and review, because that also gives us a hand. So after this podcast goes live, I expect to see at least 10 or 12 fresh reviews, or else, I mean, we're not going to go on strike or anything, but please I'm asking very nicely. Anyway, that'll do it for us for today. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.